Um, Nicole, if you'd like to start by introducing uh, the Livingston Diversity Council and why you wanted to host this, that'd be great.
Great. Wonderful. Thank you so much. And good morning. It's still 11:59 on my clock, so I'm going to say it's still morning. Welcome to our March Learn, Love Livingston online learning session. I'm Nicole Matthews-Creech. I'm the president of the board of directors for the Livingston Diversity Council, and monthly we host this online learning series featuring different topics, different hosts, and I'm really excited to partner with the Civility Project on for our March session. It really says it all in the flyer and the website for the Civility Project about why this project is so important across our country, not just here Livingston locally, but across our country, across our state, within our communities, even within just the interactions that we have. These are really divisive times, and everyone is real passionate about their thoughts and their beliefs, and that doesn't necessarily make them wrong, but we have lost that art of civility. And I'm really hoping that today we can garner some insight into how that's happened and how we can remedy it moving forward. So again, I'm just really very excited to welcome all of you to this session. And I hope that we can learn some great things to be able to take forward with us today. And I'm very excited to hear from Stephen and Nolan about your project. I really have been looking forward to this for about 6 months. So super excited.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nicole. Before I hand things over to Nolan, Finley, and Stephen Henderson, I just want to thank our partners, Delta Dental and Huntington Bank, who fund the Civility Project. And with that in mind, I would like to share a quick little video from Delta Dental that sort of explains why they're so committed to supporting this growing program.
We are living in challenging times. Politics is polarizing. Racism is rampant. The pandemic is frightening, and families are divided. Tough times require more dialogue and more understanding. But navigating our differences constructively is hard work. Delta Dental believes that healthy, smart, vibrant communities are also civil and harmonious. They are places where disagreement does not have to be toxic or destructive. Civility starts with listening. Welcome to the Civility Project.
So that gives a little bit of background into what we do, and we're going to jump in just a moment. I would encourage everybody to put questions in the chat as we go through the program, and I will flow them into the conversation. And so now I'd like to invite Stephen and Nolan to introduce themselves and talk a little bit about how the Civility Project came to be and what it's all about. So you guys, it's all you.
Thanks, Lynn, and thanks to the Livingston Civility Council. I think, Nicole, you set this up very nicely when you said we can't talk to each other today. And, I think that gets to the core of it. We can't talk to each other. We can't, worse than that, we seem to not be able to respect each other today if we have differences. And when you can't respect each other, when you can't talk to each other, leads to misunderstandings. It leads to assumptions. Assumptions lead to hatred. Hatred leads to dehumanization. It is a very, very negative chain that goes forward once you stop talking to each other, once you stop listening to each other. And what Steve and I hope to do through this project, and been trying to do through this project, is just to help people understand you can have relationships across the political divide, and it's very important to have relationships across the political divide. And the things we talk about grew about of our own experience. This isn't some theory with us. This is not some professorial lecture. This is our own experiences. And, we have been friends for well over a decade. The time keeps going on, but, it started when Steve came to the Detroit Free Press as editorial page editor, a progressive newspaper. I was already editorial page editor of the Detroit News, a conservative newspaper. And so those positions placed us together in a lot of different formats. People like to put us together, watch us argue, watch us go at it. And we did that. But something else, something happened over the course of that, where you might expect people who, on a weekly basis got together and had very passionate arguments about issues and very passionate disagreements, it would put a wall between them. And that didn't happen with Steve and I. We developed a friendship that grew and deepened, and a respect. Even though we never developed much of an agreement, we still disagree on just about everything. Very few things you can mention that we don't disagree on. And it's sort of we came into a period in this country where that was very unusual for people who so passionately disagreed to also have a close friendship. And people started asking us about it, and we started thinking about it, and we started trying to pull people together of different views. My friends and Steve friends, our acquaintances, people we knew who shared, who had pretty severe political differences. We started pulling them together in monthly events, bourbon nights, if you will. We went to a local pub and shared good bourbon. Started out with 15, 20 of us from different persuasions, talking to each other, not necessarily about politics, not arguing, but just getting to know each other and getting to understand that the people on the other side of the political aisle aren't monsters. And from those sessions, from those monthly sessions, grew the Civility Project. We've been talking to groups like yours about our relationship and our tips for how you can build better relationships, personal relationships across the political divide. Been doing it for about 2 years now, and we just continue to believe that we've got to get to a place in this country where we can talk to each other with respect and civility.
Yeah. So if you think about the timeline for all of this, I think you can kind of understand the urgency of now. So, when Nolan and I met, it was 2007. And if you think back to what was going on at that time, we were just about to start a presidential campaign that would see Barack Obama, the first African-American president elected. Things were pretty divided. People were pretty worked up about not a lot of different things. And even back then, folks looked at us a little askance about the idea that we could sort of have this civil exchange and even be becoming friends, despite our real differences. Fast forward, though, 9 years to 2016 and the presidential election to replace Barack Obama after he'd served 8 years. And then fast forward 4 more years to 2020, when President Donald Trump stood for re-election and lost. I mean, the ability and the willingness of people to be able to have these kind of conversations or maintain these kind of relationships, even within their own families, really deteriorated badly over that time. And so one of the things that really inspired us was that change, that absolute crumbling of the infrastructure for people to be able to have civil exchanges across political or other divides. And if you think about where we are right now with what I would call a crisis of civil exchange, Nolan and I really felt like one of the things that could help was talking about the ways in which we have navigated that for nearly 15 years now. And we always say up front, this is not a kumbaya session, everybody hold hands together and get along. If you've ever seen Nolan and I have a debate or an argument, you know that it's often pretty passionate. Sometimes one of us is pretty angry, or both of us are pretty angry, and we get after each other because we do fundamentally see things differently, and we do just absolutely disagree on almost any political issue you'd throw between the two of us. But over 15 years, we've learned a couple of things about those exchanges and about each other that change the nature of it so that it is civil, or protect the nature of it so it is civil. And one of them, of course, is that both of us realize and began to realize early on that neither of us was the sum of our political viewpoints, and that the relationship between us didn't have to be the sum of our disagreements. There are those disagreements. They are very passionate and sometimes bitter, but you didn't have to stop there. We didn't have to say, well, all there is between us is that disagreement or that debate. And both of us, I think, really made an effort to know more about the other guy, the guy that we're talking with and arguing with, getting to know one another, getting to know more about one another, getting to know more about where and why our political views have evolved. One of the things we talk about all the time is the need to be able to see people as a whole, and not just their political views, and understanding what it is that they've experienced or what's happened in their lives. It brings them to the point of view that they have. That's one of the real keys to the civility that exists between the two of us. And so what we've been doing the last 2 years really is trying to turn that outward and talk to people, groups like these, about the things that have worked for us and whether those things could work for them. Are there ways in your family? Are there ways in your school community? Are there ways in your neighborhood or other social groups to be able to, build and maintain actual relationships with people that you don't agree with and have arguments with, to continue to have those arguments, to continue to be as dug in as you want to be about the way you see things and allow them to do the same, but not let it get to the point where you can't talk to somebody or you won't talk to somebody. One thing that Nolan and I have never said to each other in 15 years is neither one of us has gotten up from an argument and said, I'm done with that guy. I've had it. I'm not coming back. I'm not talking to him anymore. There is always another day, and that is true because of the things that we've learned about seeing each other as far more than those disagreements.
And let's maybe get to the how to, because it's fine to say we need to have civil conversations, and I'm going to go over there and talk to that person I know thinks 100% different than I do, and we're going to have a civil conversation about difficult issues. I guarantee you, if you start like that, before the conversation ends, somebody's feelings going to be hurt. You're going to be angry. You're going to be frustrated. You're going to be bitter, and you are going to walk away. Before you start having the difficult conversations, the hard conversations, and the conversations that could lead to consensus. Maybe not, but it could lead to practical solutions. You got to know who you're talking to, and that's for the Civility Project. That's our first step. Is we want people to get to start the conversation, to start the relationship by talking about who you are and who the other person is. Ask questions. Our, core belief at the Civility Project is that everybody comes to their positions in the same way. We all take the data, all good people take the data, take the information available, run it through the filter of their own values and their own experiences, and come up with an opinion. And before you start or attempt to have a civil conversation, you should understand what those values and experiences are. Ask those kind of questions. Why are you a conservative? Why are you a liberal? What are the values that inform your positions? And once you do that, once you understand where an opinion is coming from, it makes it harder to dismiss the other person as simply being, oh, they're just stupid. They're just evil. They hate the country. You become to understand that there is a foundation for those opinions. You may not agree with the foundation. You certainly may not agree with the opinion that comes out of it. But if you understand that there's an honest process for getting there, it makes respect more possible. And a civil relationship always has to start with that respect and understanding.
So we have an amazing question in the chat that I'd love to put before now. So one of the participants said that they're here to learn skills for how to communicate about divisive issues. They have 3 friends they've known for 30 years, and they love each other dearly. 2 are conservative, 2 are liberal, and they can't have a conversation about current events without a lot of tension. But they also watch different media outlets, so they can't even agree on what reality is, what is really happening. How do they discuss when they don't agree on what's actually happening?
So, I think this is a pretty common circumstance right now. When you have groups of people who don't agree, and you're right that at this point it's not even about different opinions so much as it often is about different facts that we all use to come to our political opinions. One thing that I think we talk about all the time is not being shy about or not being afraid of the tension that exists around your political disagreements. As you point out, you've been friends for 30 years. So these are pretty strong relationships with lots of different dimensions and lots of nuance and complexity to them. The friendships would survive discussions about these issues. The friendships would not necessarily even be in peril by talking about these 10 things. It's really about learning how to talk about those things and how to bring the right expectations to those parts of the relationship so they don't threaten others. So one of the things we talk about all the time is setting those expectations in realistic fashion. When you're talking to somebody that you don't agree with, especially someone that you've known for a long time, and they don't see the world the same way you do, one thing we ask people to do is not go into the conversation thinking it's a contest.
Yes.
It's a way to win, or maybe to embarrass the other person, or shame that person into thinking the way you do, or even trying to convince that person to think the way you do. The purpose of these kind of conversations, especially in larger relationships, I think, is the value of the exchange itself. So when Nolan and I are talking about things that we disagree about, I think for both of us, there is, we put a premium on the idea of learning about what the other thinks and why. And we're not coming to the conversation with much more expectation than that. Nolan, for me, often is kind of a check for my own understanding and thinking about things. It's a way to see them from a really different vantage point. It's a way to check my own thinking about it. Often I will not change what I think, because of something that Nolan and I talk about, but I might think about it differently. I might have a different approach to my arguments because I know what he's thinking. I think limiting your expectations to a universe that looks like that is kind of the first step to being able to have these kind of conversations with people, especially people you've known for a really long time, and avoiding the idea that you're gonna beat this person in the conversation. I mean, there's a lot of that right now, and lots of places around us encourage that kind of thinking. I think you have to kind of back away from that and say, I want to know what my friend thinks about this, even though I know he or she thinks differently than I do, but because they think differently, I want to understand that thinking.
I think that's well said, Steve. And I would go back to the question that was posed: how do we come to agreement? You may not, and as Steve said, that's not necessarily the goal of the conversation. I mean, it would be nice if we can all sit down, have a civil conversation, come to an agreement at the end. We're all on the same page. Probably not going to happen. And if you go into a conversation with that goal, it's going to be frustrating. Steve and I have probably had, over these 14 years, 4,000 hours of conversation. We've never come to agreement on very many things, but we've had a lot of good, stimulated conversations. We've learned from each other. We found value in the process. So I would say start with an honest goal and a doable, an achievable goal. Coming to an agreement's not an honest goal. That just sets up, as Steve said, a competition. Somebody each of you trying to overcome the other. Start with an honest goal. And the goal should be to find some value in the conversation through the exchange of ideas, to learn something from each other. Can I walk away and say from that conversation and say, I understand that person a little better. I understand the other side of the issue a little better. I haven't changed my mind, but I have a broader view. That's an honest goal. When you start out with unreasonable expectations, you're not going to get the outcome you desire. And and one of the reasons people avoid these conversations is they know they can't. They're not going to come to agreement. So what's the point? Well, the point is learning about each other and from each other and having more honest interactions. When we did this civility project a couple of years ago for the chamber on Mackinac Island, we put a group of people together who shared different views one-on-one. So the people paired up and went through a little exercise of trying to understand each other a little better. And we come out at the end, brought them back and asked them to tell us about it. And we had two women who were neighbors, and they had been walking together every morning for 7 years. And they knew they were on, one was a Republican, one was a Democrat, but they never talked about political issues because they had some very negative assumptions about the reasons the other person held their view. Once they talked, they gained that understanding, and they came out and said, now we know why they vote the way they do. Neither one of them was going to change their position, but they had a better view of the other person and a more charitable view of the other person, if you will.
Yeah, so we have lots of wonderful questions in the chat.
Good.
And so I want to ask one of them and then also follow it up, maybe talking a little bit about the impact of media on civility or incivility, since that's one thing that group of friends can't agree on is what's true, what's not true. So we'll get there in a second. But one of the participants said that her sister and her husband have become major QAnon supporters, and they haven't talked in almost a year, and she'd love to be able to fix that. And so I wonder if you guys have recommendations for, where do people start when they have these even like stressed relationships like that, where they're afraid, they haven't been in touch for a while. How do you rebuild? How do you take those baby steps to even get to a starting point to start to have a civil discussion?
Len, I've got a similar, I got a very close family member in that same position. And it's extraordinarily difficult to have a conversation with somebody who's fueled by those sort of demons. I haven't figured it out. I try to listen. I try to ask questions. Um, I try to accept the fact that I'm not going to change this person. You're not going to convert. And if your goal is to convert, yeah, just talk about the kids or something, or whatever, because it's not going to happen. I try to answer or ask more questions than I do trying to set him straight, because we're not saying this is possible with every single person. I got another cousin who is so out of her mind about Donald Trump. You can't have any sort of conversation with her. Well, the fruit's bad this year because of Donald Trump. I mean, everything in her world, revolves around Donald Trump. So I've got these folks on both sides in my family. It's just extremely hard to talk to them. And I found it better not to preach, but to try to figure out where that's coming from and offer as gently as I can, some corrections, some better information. It's not easy, and they do tend to blow up, both of them. But you can continue a conversation, I think, if you just approach it as gently as possible in those kind of situations. Most people aren't there, though. Most people aren't that extreme.
Well, and I think one of the things that one of the things that's become really clear, at least to me, over the last couple of years, is what some of the drivers are for, especially the most extreme iterations of this that we see. I mean, people who are so strident and so certain of the truth that as they understand it, and a lot of it is fear, right? I mean, there are a lot of people who have a lot of reasons to be afraid right now, and that fear translates into sort of grasping these very extreme ideas, which offer very simple solutions to very complex problems, right? They are very simple ways to explain the things that you're afraid of or the things that are challenging you. But one of the other things that I've found, and I think is really common right now, is that people don't feel heard. They don't feel like the way that they're experiencing things or the way that they're thinking is being respected. And that drives them to, I think, some of these extremes as well. And that's a place where I think, especially when you're talking about somebody close to you, you have the opportunity to do that differently. Just listening to them about not just what they're saying, but why they believe it, what's driving them to that position, I think is one way to at least open up a dialogue, a legitimate dialogue where you're both listening to and talking to one another in a way that does bridge some of that gap. Now, again, I think the goal is not to convince, it's not to win. It is to have that dialogue and to draw value from that dialogue. But just the idea of being heard. I happen to be not in Southeast Michigan this week. I'm in mid-Missouri, which is where my mom and my sister and her family live. And I've been back and forth to the hospital here because my mom is there. Mid-Missouri is a very different place than Southeast Michigan politically. It is a very conservative place, and there are lots of rural communities around the university where my sister works here that interact with people in the city, and especially at the hospital, which is the only hospital for miles and miles and miles. You get a lot of white rural conservatives who come here, and the interactions I've been able to have with some of them. Now, I mean, this is going to sound like stereotype, but I mean, I have met several people or just had brief exchanges with several people who are wearing overalls and plaid shirts and literally have on Donald Trump hats, which I didn't know was really a thing anymore. I was like, or they
Got to
say
get out
40
more, Steve.
they say 45 on them, or they say Trump, and I'm like, that would be a little like me wearing an Obama hat. I mean, it's just strange. It was not something I would do now. He was president, he's not now. But for them, they are still really, really motivated by him, by his politics, whatever. And I think that my instinct when I see that, first of all, is to be a little surprised, but also to kind of judge a little bit. And I've been trying not to. And so I've been trying to instead, say hello. And, we're all at the hospital for the same reason, because we got family there or something. To maybe be able to talk to people in a way that makes them feel legitimate and heard and like I'm not judging them. And it's reminded me several times of what Nolan and I are talking about, which is the power of being able to make a connection with somebody or try to make a connection with somebody in order to be able to just talk to them and not feel like you got to win or judge them or put them down. It really is about, in many cases, they don't feel heard. Someone wearing a Donald Trump hat right now in 2022 clearly doesn't feel heard, right? The guy's not president. He hasn't been president for almost a year and a half. Maybe he'll run again someday, but I mean, that's over for most of us. But for a lot of people, it's not. It really isn't. And they don't feel like they have a voice, I think, the same way that the rest of us do. And so that's one of the ways that I think you really can reach people and give them, a path to the kind of dialogue that you're looking for.
And Steve, to get to that point, you had to set aside your assumptions about people based on, the things they were projecting. You had to give that person a chance. I always tell the story about when you and I were up on Mackinac again for the Republican convention. This was probably, I don't know, 2014, 16, somewhere in there. And we were in a bar late at night and drinking, and I got up from the bar for a few minutes, and I bumped into these two Republican women who stopped me and said, "You're over there talking with Steve Henderson. How can you be friends with him? He's awful. We just hate him." And when they said that word, "We just hate him," it just really struck a negative chord with me. And I says, "You hate him?" I said, "Do you know him?" And they said, "No, we've never met him." And I said, "Well, go over there. My space is empty. Go over there and talk to him. Do me a favor. Talk to him for a couple minutes." They talked to Steve for an hour and a half, walked away, found me and said, "Oh God, we love him. He's just great." Now, Steve hadn't changed. They hadn't changed, but he took the time to talk to them, to set aside their assumptions and talk to him. And, that's the heart of this. That's the key to this. Whenever I hear somebody say, "Oh gosh, I hate that person," based on their political viewpoints or what they think they know about them based on what they write or say. And Steve and I get this all the time. I can show my emails from Sunday. The people, "Oh, we hate you, blankety, blankety, blank." People who've never met you. And I think we've really got to get past those words in our discourse today, that you hate somebody because they live on the other side of the political divide. We just got to stop that hating based on our assumptions of who people are and do what Steve did. Try to get to know who they are.
So I do want to go back to that media question, since both of you are members of the media, and you've mentioned that some people really say some awful things after you write something or say something. One question that we had as a follow-up was from Adrienne. She said, "Can we agree that the vast majority of media outlets are purposely divisive to earn ratings and attain other objectives?" And so
Yeah.
I want to put that before you and also say to talk a little bit about what is the role of media in either, I guess, being an obstacle to civility, promoting incivility, helping us? How do we make sense of the various different stances and perspectives that we hear in different media outlets? How does that help or hinder us in this pursuit of civility?
Well, that's a good question. And both Steve and I have lived in the media our whole lives. And the role of the media in this issue is, my view, is to be a forum for a productive exchange of ideas that bring people together, that unite people, that create a sense of common mission. Doesn't necessarily mean we have to convince everybody to think the same way, but we should be a forum for the honest exchange of ideas. And too many media outlets today are not, or they're just what the question asker described. They profit, they benefit from dividing, from sowing hatred, from misleading, from slanting. And the places where you have now honest media, objective media, and I know that's a word that's sort of fallen out of favor, but it was the word I was raised with. Places where people feel comfortable exchanging ideas, they're limited. You got a lot of screaming. You got you've got a lot of misinformation. You got a lot of bad actors in media today who are not doing us any favors.
Yeah, I think traditional media is really different, and media are undergoing a pretty serious transformation of our own. It does mean something really different now, partially because of the ubiquity of media. I mean, that started with the 24-hour television news cycle, which is now almost 25 or 30 years old. But the internet accelerated that and spread it to print journalism and other things, and it really has become much more of a competition for attention than it used to be, and the competition for attention is pretty intense, and that has driven, I think, this idea of more point of view kind of journalism than straight ahead journalism in a lot of cases. I think when you're talking about traditional media, I think you should watch everything and read everything with a healthy skepticism, with the understanding that it may be written with a point of view in mind, and it may be written or produced to further that point of view, and that's okay as long as you're digesting it, understanding that, right? There's nothing wrong with point of view journalism so long as you're not thinking that it's not that. I think the other real danger, though, is social media, which is, of course, also driving change in traditional media. But there's so many negative dynamics to social media right now, and I think they reflect our culture more than they reflect the technology itself. But that does make it very difficult to do what we're talking about doing. Social media really encourages all the bad habits that lead to really uncivil exchanges, and rewards them. I mean, applauds them in many cases. And so it really is a counter to what Nolan and I are talking about. I mean, the anonymity of it is a counter to that. The rudeness and the shutting out that goes on social media of things that you don't agree with, shutting out of people that you don't agree with. You really do have to step away from those things, I think, in order to try to build the kind of relationships that we're talking about.
And I saw a couple of questions pop up about recommending media resources. I can't think of a single source media outlet where you could, you're going to get it all square and, the straight facts and what have you. My advice is always use your clicker. Don't lock in on one station or one website. You to be a honest consumer of information today, you've got to seek out a lot of different sources. If you're sitting there watching a news program or on a website where there's only one point of view being offered, whether it's from the right or from the left. You probably want to click around a little bit and find different points of view. I mean, I'm a conservative. There are conservative commentators out there I simply can't watch or listen to on the radio or read on the website because they're just so angry. There are progressive commentators I can't listen to because they're just so angry. We all recognize anger, I think, and we all recognize one-sidedness. If you're seeing that from your media resource, move on. I mean, if you're hearing a lot of opinion with your news, move on. I mean, Steve and I are in the opinion business. So, I always preface my comments by saying that you expect opinion for us. I don't expect opinion from people who are pretending to bring me information I need to make better decisions for my life. I want a complete story. And the outlets are fewer. I think you've got to shop around and sort of be your own compiler of aggregator of information to make sure you're getting balance.
There is an Instagram account called All Sides now that will
Mhm.
show the liberal, centrist, and conservative views on a particular issue. So that's something to look at. Something else to think about is, look at sort of companion outlets. Like if you read the New York Times, read the Wall Street Journal. If you read the Wall Street Journal, read the New York Times. Like just because they're at the same level of quality journalism, but have different biases. So, if you're in Detroit, read the Free Press and the News. Like, look at both of them and see what both sides are saying. Stephen, do you have any recommendations for media outlets that?
Yeah, I don't have as bad a view of most media outlets, I think, as maybe Nolan does. I think I think the quality and the breadth of news that's available out there is higher than it maybe has ever been. But Nolan's not wrong that a lot of it comes from this, this kind of point of view journalism world. I will admit that, I worked for several years in Washington before I came back to Detroit. And I was covering the Supreme Court in Washington. The media that I would do then taught me a lot about how each of them kind of approach things. I used to appear on Fox News, the national cable channel, pretty regularly when I covered the court, but I appeared on the news programs there. Like there was this really great Sunday morning news program that was really just about what was going on. And I never felt like what was going on in that program was slanted the way that much of Fox News is. The same thing's true over at CNN. Most of the day now, in fact, they're just doing news, and they've pulled back on these kind of 5, 6, 7 person panels where everyone's just expressing opinion and kind of arguing. And so I think you can get from almost anywhere a really high level and quality of information. You have to be pretty discerning, though, I think, to recognize what's that and what's something else. And so the idea of a pretty rich diet of news that comes from several sources makes tons of sense.
Right.
But again, you have to be thinking about, hey, what is this? What are they trying to get me to think or know? And understand it's one source. And in a few minutes, you can go off and find another source that's probably talking about the same thing.
So I'd love for you guys to jump into a little talking about the art of listening and how that plays into building civility. It's not what we think it is, and maybe most of us aren't really doing it right. So what would you say about that?
Well, I would say good listening starts with checking your self-righteousness at the door, check your smugness, harbor at least some self-doubt about your own opinions, and consider the possibility that you could learn something from somebody you disagree with. It will sharpen your listening skills if you go in with that approach. If you're not, as Steve said earlier, if your goal is not to convert, but to hear, I think you've got a much better chance of hearing what the other person is saying. Everybody thinks they're the only ones who talk to God. Understand that the person you're talking to is just as committed to their viewpoints as you are yours, and just as convinced that you are wrong as you are convinced that they are wrong. So, come in with open ears.
Yeah, we do talk about listening a lot, and it is one of the, it's kind of one of the fundamental principles of civility, I think. And we do use that word a little differently, I think, than most of us use it in our lives. I think for most of us, the idea of listening is just not talking, right? If you're letting someone else talk, that means you're listening. But often I find myself, when Nolan and I are arguing about something and he's talking, maybe I'm thinking about what I just said to him before he started talking, or maybe I'm thinking about what I'm going to say as soon as he stops talking. What's my next point going to be? Or maybe I'm sitting there and judging what he's saying as he's saying it, instead of trying to figure out what he is actually trying to say and what he means, and valuing the idea that I might learn something from what he's saying. Those are the things that I think take us away from the kind of listening that we're talking about doing. And I think approaching it in a way that really asks an investment of you in what someone else is saying is the beginning of the kind of listening that we think about when we think about civil conversations. And I have a couple of tests for myself to determine whether I'm actually doing that kind of listening. The first is when Nolan or somebody else is done making the point that they're making, I ask myself whether I could repeat it back to them in good faith, right? Not in a critical way, not in a mocking way, but as though I were them. Could I make his argument the same way that he did, even though I don't necessarily agree with it? I think that's a really good test for how well we're listening to each other. And then the other test I have is whether I have questions about what the other person is saying. Did I hear something that maybe I didn't quite get or didn't quite understand how it connected to everything else they were saying? Is there something I want to know more about? And when there is, then I know I'm actually listening and I'm actually investing in that other person and their ideas, which I think is kind of a critical part of what we're saying here with the idea of listening.
So as we sort of near the end of our hour, what are the last thoughts or practical steps you'd like to offer for people about how they get started? So, okay, they're really charged up after this call and they want to move forward and have more civil conversations. Who do they start this with? What are their first steps? What are some tools to move forward and put this into action?
So we've got a good question, actually, that takes us to that space. Amelia Ascari, who is a former colleague of mine from the Free Press, I think I've now known her for 30 years, since I was an intern at the Free Press, asks about Howell, which is one of the places, of course, in Livingston County, and its history, its reputation related to race. It has a very specific history with regard to race. And, I think what she's asking is, how do you talk about that? How do you address that? How do you give people space to think about it and to confront it? And I think that's one of the big things. I think that's a great opportunity in Livingston County. I think it's a great opportunity for a group like this, which is interested in the idea of civil conversation and more of it. You know, putting this into practice, putting some of the things that we're talking about into practice in the context of something like race is one of the most difficult things that happens. Race and racism often inspired the most passionate arguments and sometimes bitter arguments between me and Nolan. But I think if you start with the idea that this is something that deserves more conversation, that all of us could learn more about, understand more about, and by doing that, create, you know, a better dialogue about these things. That's one of the first steps. The other first step, and the other thing that's really important about what Amelia is pointing out here, is this is a place that you all have agency. You all live or work in Livingston County. And so it's your space. It's all of your spaces. And one of the things I think is really frustrating right now is that so much of the incivility we see or hear about, we see on television or we see on social media, and it's really far away from us. It's really far away from the spaces that we live in. And so it can feel really defeating. It feels like the world is all at each other's throats and there's nothing we can do about it. But if you think about the places where you do have agency, the places where you do live, the places where you do interact with other people, that's the opportunity. That's where the opportunity exists to do something about all of this. And talking about race, talking about change and race, talking about history and race in some place like Howell or Livingston County, you know, is absolutely within the power of everyone in this discussion right here. And then agreeing to do it without saying, well, I'm going to win. I'm going to show these people that they're wrong, or I'm going to embarrass somebody by showing that they're wrong. And instead going in and saying, there's a lot more that all of us can know about this history. There's a lot more that we can understand about how this history affects where we live and where we work. And the goal is to have everybody at the table, no matter what they think, in order to have that conversation and improve the understanding. So that's I think a really great way to think of beginning these kind of conversations.
Yeah, and to recognize that, speaking to that specific issue question, the Howell of today is not the Howell of the 1970s and into the 1980s. It's come a long way. It's changed a lot, evolved a lot. It's much more cosmopolitan. So, that's something to celebrate. The present and the future are something to celebrate as much as the past is something to be condemned. And I think if you acknowledge and focus on the progress and where you all are headed together, rather than just focusing on the negative past, I think it helps create a more positive environment for the discussion.
So one last question as we finish up today, that's been going on in the chat is about how about those folks who just aren't in a place to have these conversations? And, you know, again, choosing the people that we engage with toward building civility is probably a really important thought process, but there are going to be people who maybe aren't there. And so, you know, how do we handle that? How do we approach it?
Well, I mean, you can't do it without you. It's not going to work with everyone. But there are some people in your lives you wanted to work with. And so you perhaps work a little harder. And there are other people who are open to these sort of exchanges. I mean, again, we're not out here saying, you know, there's some magic formula and you follow these 5, 6, 7, 8 tips and boom, you could talk to anyone, anywhere about anything. The goal here is to talk to more people than you are now, to broaden your circle, to hear from more points of view than you're hearing from now, and to open yourself to more people than you're open to now. Might not be everyone, and it might not be all the time, but we can make some progress.
All right. Anything else that we want to address, Nicole? Any last questions before we sign off for today?
Well, I think, we've had a little bit of conversation around the idea that not everybody is ready to have these conversations. And I think it's hard and you feel kind of at a loss with, we have some really contentious school board meetings right now, which is, again, not unique to Livingston County by any stretch of the imagination. And so I think the hope is really like, it's great for us to be able to broaden our current circle and have that. Is there anything we can do when we go to things like these board meetings where we know it is going to be almost an unsafe space to have conversations, but you feel like you need to be present? Is there anything that a person can maybe even tell themselves? Like, if I can't impact this person, how can I continue to be good? Set a good example for others to follow suit, maybe at some point in the day.
Well, that's it. That's it. Make sure you're ready yourself, that you're truly prepared for a civil conversation, which means listening to other people whose views you may, absolutely despise. Make sure you're ready for that yourself, and make sure, again, that you've checked your self-righteousness at the door and are open to this, and as you said, be a good example. Answer, meet incivility with civility. Keep your calm, ask good questions, and understand that there's no victory point in these conversations. There's no crossing a finish line. It's an ongoing process.
We also have a civility session on our website, which is greatlakeCivilityProject.com, with the Birmingham Public Schools. We've done 3 sessions with them. 2 of them were virtual, so we have the videos there under resources if you wanted to watch. And it's because of this, because they had such fraught board meetings and really combative situations between parents in the district and administrators, teachers, people like that. And so, and then the 3rd session was actually Stephen and Nolan working in person with the board and the administration on how to handle these situations and how to navigate it productively. So we're starting to dip a toe in those waters and work with school boards and school districts. And it goes back to what Stephen said earlier, that a lot of people don't feel heard. And so it's how can we address that, as opposed to let's come, with our dukes up, you know what I mean? So, but that is definitely a resource. And before we finish, I just want to thank everyone for coming, and also say, and it's early in the chat, I can put it in again, but we have our first ever Civility Day coming up May 20th at Henry Ford College. And anybody can participate. It's going to be a fantastic all-day program of both speakers and interactive civility building with people that you've never met. So it could be a wonderful opportunity. If you are interested in hearing more about it, you can definitely let me know. I'm going to put my email in the chat, and also can check us out on our website, and we'll be happy to welcome you in. So thank you so much. Thank you, Stephen and Nolan, and thank you, Nicole, for coordinating this. It's just been wonderful.
Thank you all.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.